Leslie, thank you so much for your message this morning. You made 2 promises and you delivered. One of the promises that you made to us is that we would know what we need to do to have a healthy, happy relationship or healthy relationships. And then you also promised us that you would give us some tools to learn what we need to do to change when our relationships are in need of repair. And I would just encourage those of you who are watching, if you didn't get to watch this morning's message, you can go back and do it. Please, please, please do it. Some practical walkaways and just based on the Word of God as well. So we'd love that. But you can do that on our app. You can do that on our website. You can do that on our YouTube channel. You can even listen on our podcast. So go do that. But wait till the end of our conversation today. For those of you who don't know Leslie, we are honored to have her with us today. She's the author of 7 books, including the best-selling one I'm reading right now, The Emotionally Destructive Relationship, Seeing It, Stopping It, and Surviving It. And then her most recent book is The Emotionally Destructive Marriage. Leslie's a popular speaker, author, licensed clinical social worker, and she's a relationship coach. She received her master's degree in clinical social work from the University of Illinois and received her postgraduate training in biblical counseling as well as cognitive therapy. But I think the thing that makes her most qualified for this conversation is because she has been married to her husband, Howard, for the past 43 years. You don't even look like you're 43 years old. That's not even fair. She has 2 grown children and 3 grandchildren. So thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule. And it was hard to book this conversation. So thank you so much for doing that. We really, really appreciate it.
You're so welcome. I wish I could have been there in person, but this is second best.
Yeah, a little bit different, right? For sure. And you're in Arizona, correct?
I'm in Arizona right now, and I am in the White Tank Mountains. So I live in the Phoenix area, which is very, very hot. So we kind of get up here most of the summer so that we can be away from the 115 degrees and have about 85 degrees, much different.
My goodness, I don't blame you. Got to be hard to breathe when it's 115 degrees.
Yeah, it's like you're in a pizza oven.
Ooh, yeah. Well, I really want us to dive a little bit deeper into some of the things that you talked about this morning about maintaining healthy relationships and also repairing broken relationships. And I also really want us to talk about what do we do, if you can help us with this, what do we do if we find ourselves in an emotionally destructive relationship? Or what do we do, or what can we say, how can we help if we have somebody that we know somebody that we love who is in an emotionally destructive relationship? So it's a lot to cover in a short amount of time, but I think we can do it. You on board for this?
I am.
All right, sounds good. Before we do that though, can you just take a couple of minutes, tell us a little bit about what makes you so passionate about the work that you do?
You know, I think, Christine, this is a really important story because I not only understand emotionally destructive relationships and relationships, healthy relationships, unhealthy relationships from a biblical as well as a professional perspective, but I know what it feels like to be in one. And my emotionally destructive relationship was not with my husband, but it was with my mother. And so here I was, a young child at 8 years old. My mother decided she didn't want to be married to my father anymore. And she drove to my school one day in a U-Haul trailer with all of our stuff. But we moved to a 1-bedroom apartment in Chicago. I knew no one I knew was divorced. I was a gawky little kid. I didn't know what to do with myself. And my mother didn't know what to do with herself either. As a grown-up, I can understand how rough it must have been for her as a single mom, you know, in the 60s, trying to make life work by herself. She had some mental health issues, and she also drank a lot. So she worked by day as a secretary. By night, at the weekends, she worked at the Playboy Club in Chicago as a waitress. Wow. So she was often not home. And when she was home, she was depleted, she was cranky, she was drinking, and that led to a lot of abuse, emotionally and physically, especially to me as I was the oldest child. I think she expected more from me than I was capable of at 8 or 9 years old. And also I probably had the biggest mouth. So I always challenged and, you know, kind of dug back at her at things. And of course she didn't like that. So got a lot of emotionally wounding words as a child, things that no parent should ever say to a child, as well as my teeth knocked out, my head put through a window, different things that were physically abusive. And so finally, when I was 14 years old and my siblings were younger, my father, who had been remarried, he had recommitted his life to Christ, but unbeknownst to us, had continually gone to the courts to get custody of us because he saw what was happening at home and he couldn't do anything. And so finally the judge awarded him custody. And so we went to live with my dad. And when I went to live with my dad, eventually he, had all kinds of rules. I had to go to church. I had to go to school, all things that I didn't have to do at home, as long as I didn't stay in my mother's way and she wasn't home. She didn't know what I did. And so now my whole life is turned upside down. And I'm beginning to have structure and stability, and I'm not used to that. So for those stepmoms in the audience, I want to give you a lot of love and thank you, because my stepmother was a true hero in our lives, because we were not easy to absorb into this new family, because she had 3 kids also. And so it was rough. We were the Brady Bunch when the Brady Bunch wasn't on TV yet, and there were no rule books to live by. So it was tough, but I eventually came to Christ. And then I went, and a youth pastor took me under his wing. And this is so important, because the church often functions as the hospital as well as the family for someone who's broken and bruised, and they need the family of God to teach them what healthy looks like. And sometimes the church itself isn't all that healthy, which we can talk about in a little bit. But my church was just this little tiny church, and they loved on us. My youth pastor loved on me. I was his practice counseling client because he was going to seminary and he needed somebody to practice with. I babysat his kids. And so when I went to college, I hadn't had much contact with my mother after she lost custody of us. She went off the deep end. She was still abusive. And I went to college. I wanted to be a Christian counselor, finished my bachelor's degree. I didn't invite her to my graduation. I went for my master's degree. I didn't invite her to my wedding. My husband met her once, my fiance husband. He didn't want her to come to our wedding. She was scary. She was scary. She could be violent. She remarried. She stabbed her husband in a fit of anger. I mean, she was a scary woman. And so here I am. I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian counselor, and I'm reading all these verses and I'm trying to counsel people, and I'm not even able to manage a relationship with my own mother. Like, do you forgive? How do you forgive the unforgivable? And if you forgive, does that mean I have to let her see my children? Does that mean I have to let her into my home? What if she goes off on one of my kids? I don't trust her. And so it made me really wrestle. Is God mad at me? Am I inadequate because I don't trust her and I don't want to have a relationship with this woman who's not repentant? She's not changed. She's still drinking. She's still crazy. And I can't do this. And so there was a lot of shame as a Christian. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to navigate these waters. And so that's when I dug deep into the scriptures, and I found God has a lot to say about not only healthy relationships, but also unhealthy relationships and toxic, destructive relationships. And he does not require us to have relationships with everyone. Jesus didn't even have relationships with everyone. And so I think that's been an inordinate burden that the church has put on people who really want to follow God and forgive and love their enemy. But if they're your enemy, they're precisely your enemy because they've done you harm, as my mother did to me. And you can't have a loving, safe relationship with an enemy. You can love an enemy from a distance. And so it just brought me on this journey. And so I began to work with abused children in my professional life. And I began to, now this is way back in the 70s, like 1970s, when I began to go to the churches and say, we need a program for supervising and screening childcare workers, because you're just allowing anybody who volunteers to like take children overnight on a camping trip, and we can't do that. And of course we can. We're Christians here. We don't have any of those kind of people here. Well, years later and lawsuits later, we do realize that we need to have some safety plans, and we need to be more proactive in how we deal with destructive people in the church and the wolves in sheep's clothing that look like they're benign, but they're actually very harmful. And so I began my work with children, and then how I got involved in destructive relationships with women who are abused, because you would think I would help men who are abused since my dad was the one who was abused and my mom was the abuser. But how I got involved with women is that I was writing a book on depression, Christine, my 3rd book. Mm-hmm. And as I was doing counseling in Allentown, I had a counseling office in Allentown, woman after woman after woman after woman, Christian women, godly women who were seriously emotionally depleted and suicidal and depressed. 95% of them were in destructive marriages. Wow. And I began to ask myself, is God requiring a woman who's married to a destructive, abusive man to give up her life for the sanctity of marriage? Is he asking her to stay on Xanax and take Valium and vodka at night so she can have sex with a man who treats her like garbage? And I just couldn't see the Bible supporting that. So I again dug deeper. And so that's when I wrote my book, The Emotionally Destructive Marriage. And so that's been my professional and personal journey through this. And God, when I wrote my book, The Emotionally Destructive relationship, I was actually going to turn the corner. And I said, I'm done with this tough stuff. I'm going to write. So I wrote, I Want to Be Happy. That was one book. And I wrote, I started writing a happy marriage book. Like, how do you have a healthy relationship? And all the things I talked about with you this morning. And the Lord specifically said, I have plenty of people who talk about that. Nobody's talking about this. I'm calling you to talk about the tough stuff. Wow. So that's what I do.
And you talk about it with such grace. And also, I think it's just so empowering. And I think that that's really, really important. Your story is incredible. It's one of the reasons that I am in full-time ministry, because of my childhood and the things that I endured. Very similar to your story, and just did not have it modeled for me, right? And my husband and I will be married in October for 26 years, but that's a miracle because it was rough, because we didn't have it modeled for us. And so we were just trying to figure out things on our own, and we ended up, there was a season where it was very unhealthy and very destructive, and it caused us to seek counseling. Because one thing that you said this morning that really, really hit me was that we get to write our own story, right? Regardless, we don't get to write the circumstances surrounding our lives, but we get to write the story within our responses and how we respond and how we love God and how we love one another. And will our story be a story of redemption, right? Because God, that's from the Bible, from beginning to end, is a story of redemption and restoration. And if you look throughout the entire Bible, pretty much everyone in the Bible is dysfunctional, right?
All of them. Yeah, they're all
we want to have a biblical marriage. We want to have a biblical family. What? No, God uses messed up people to tell his story of redemption and restoration. And so I just wish that I had you in my life many, many years ago to avoid some of the heartaches. But at the same time, that's what gives us the opportunities to come alongside of somebody else and say, I've been there. I've experienced that. Here's what I found, and here's what I've learned. And that's God's great, incredible grace as well. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about, when you talk about maintaining healthy relationships, how do you do that? What are some practical things that we can do to maintain healthy relationships? And then we'll talk about repairing broken relationships.
Okay. So I think it's very freeing for you and I to talk about our mistakes, because we all mess up. The Bible tells us in James 3:2, we all stumble in many ways. And so many times we can't fix something because we can't admit it's broken, right? And so if we can just start there, everybody in the Bible, look what Abraham did to Sarah. I mean, he says, well, I'm afraid you go off and sleep with this guy so that I don't have to, suffer the consequence. I mean, what a horrible husband. Mm-hmm. And so God uses broken, messed up, foolish things of this world to confound the wise, as long as we don't keep repeating those stupid, foolish, broken things. Then God calls us a fool or, unteachable. And so part of our journey through our mistakes is to become aware of them and stop making the same ones over and over again. So here's the difference. You've got two sinners who bring a suitcase full of baggage into a relationship, whether they be girlfriends or husband and wife or parent-child or whatever. You've got it, and you've got your baggage and you've got your stuff. And a healthy person, a relatively healthy person, when they know their stuff, whatever it is, my fear of failure, my shame, my anger, my dishonesty, whatever that sin we struggle with is, when I've crossed the line and I've harmed someone I love. So I'll give you, I don't think I told this story in the morning sermon. Did I tell the story about my son, Ryan? Maybe I did, where I broke his arm or I dislocated his elbow. Did I share that story?
No.
Yeah, so here I am. I grew up with this abusive mom. I get married. I'm Christian. I'm a Christian counselor. I have a little baby. And I work in the child abuse department. I work in the hospital, in my local community hospital, teaching hospital workers how to screen for child abuse. Because the 70s, that's when those laws started changing. And I'm beginning to have a lot of empathy for my mother, because I'm having this screaming baby who's screaming night and day with colic, thinking, I think I could understand how some parents shake their baby and throw them or whatever. I didn't do that, but I could feel those feelings inside of me. Mm-hmm. So when he was 2 years old, I was trying on clothes in a dressing room because I had finally lost my maternity belly and fat, and I wanted some new clothes. And of course, 2-year-old little boys love being in the dressing room, and that's nothing better for them to do. And so he started throwing one of those fits. And it was a little boutique shop, and everybody in the shop could hear him screaming, and it embarrassed me. It shamed me. And so in a fit of anger, because he was acting out. I reached down, I pulled him up by his little arm, and I stood him up to his feet. I said, "Stop it right now." And he looked at me with his big blue eyes, and tears started dropping down his face. And he held up his arm, and he goes, "Mom, you broke my arm!" Really loud for the entire dressing room to hear.
Oh.
And in that moment, I was horrified, because all I could think of, I have become my mother. I have become my mother. That self-awareness. Oh my word, I have crossed the line.
Mm-hmm.
So not a perfect person. So what I did was I picked him up, put him in his car seat, drove him to the emergency room that I worked at, told them what I did. I didn't lie about it. I didn't make excuses for it. I didn't say he was a bad kid. I broke my son's arm. Oh my gosh, what do I do? Thankfully, the doctor knew me. He said, "Well, you actually didn't break his arm, but he does have this weakness in his elbow. It's called nursemaid's elbow, and it got dislocated. Let me show you how to pop it in, because it's probably going to happen again." He popped it back in. But it was a wake-up call for me. So Christine, the difference is when you have self-awareness and humility, which is the qualities that we talked about that are important, you see you've crossed the line.
Right.
You don't make excuses. You don't blame your child. You don't blame your spouse. It's your fault I did that.
Mm-hmm.
But you take responsibility for what you've done, and it's a wake-up call. Wow, I don't want to ever do that again. So I got myself help. I got myself the help I needed to begin to learn that self-control, to learn to have greater self-awareness, to learn to develop the social skills to identify what I felt and create timeouts or boundaries for myself so I don't inflict pain on the people I love. And that's been a lifelong process, as I'm sure you and your husband had to learn. And so I think this is part of why I tried to share with your audience this morning that you can't have healthy relationships unless you have some personal qualities, like the beginnings of self-awareness. When you mess up, are you aware that it's you who messed up, even if someone provoked you? You know, Jesus says something very interesting. He said, "The good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart, and the evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in his heart. Out of the overflow of his heart, his mouth speaks." And so I have an illustration that I think will be really helpful. I used to use this in my counseling office back in Allentown. And when people would start, not being self-aware, and they would start blaming, "Well, I wouldn't have said that. I wouldn't have lied to her if she just wouldn't be so angry when I lie. Or I wouldn't have lost my temper and said those bad things if she would have just shut up." Right? All this kind of back and forth. So I would bring this bottle out, and I'd say, "Watch what happens when I shake this bottle. This nice bottle of Dasani water. And I'd shake it really hard, just like I'm going to do in front of you. Watch what happens. It turns really yucky." And then I would say to them, "Did shaking this bottle make it dirty?" And they'd be like, "I know this is a trick question. I don't know the answer." And I'd say, "Of course not. Shaking the bottle didn't make it dirty. The dirt was there all along on the bottom. You just didn't see it." And so when someone shakes you, when my son shook me in that dressing room and embarrassed me, or someone plows in the rear end of your car and shakes you, or your wife doesn't respect you like you want her to and it shakes you, how you act and how you respond is your stuff. God is showing you this so that you can become self-aware. Oh my word, I've got work to do. It's not her fault she shook me and my dirt came out. She might have shook me, and now God is showing me my dirt. That's the self-awareness piece.
Yeah, that's so good. And what you said at the beginning, I think, is so important. We need to tell on ourselves, because I found when my kids were younger, they're all grown adults now, but when they were younger, I had some real anger issues. There were times where I describe it as the monster would emerge, right? Like I was so kind and wonderful to everybody else, but my kids could push my buttons like nobody else. And it would send me, and this monster, this rageful, angry monster would come out, and it would be the same thing. I'd be like, I'm becoming my mom, or I'm becoming my stepfather. Yeah. And words would come out, just horrible words. And it was almost like I was having an out-of-body experience, looking down and going, who are you?
Yeah, who's this person, right?
Yeah. But I looked around and I looked at all my Christian friends, and they were all perfect. And so I thought, I'm the only one. And then one day I was hanging out with some of my friends, and I just finally lost it. And I said, I am a horrible person. I am the worst mother in the world. And I just started crying, and I said, I scream at my kids all the time. And I don't even know. And they all started to cry, and the walls just came down, and they all, me too, me too, me too, me too. And they were just waiting for somebody else to say that they weren't a perfect mom. they don't have a perfect marriage. But I think sometimes we look around in our churches and we think, oh, you're the perfect Christian family. And we strive to be that perfect Christian family. We try to put ourselves in the mold of, now I should be like her, or I should be like, my husband should be like him. And we lose the essence of who God created us to be. And we put on this mask and this facade that keeps everybody else trapped.
Yeah, I call that the country club, so we're the country club church. So we got our little smiles and we got our little white shirts on and everybody's good, even though we just screamed and hollered on the way to church in the car. We're just like, okay, now we put our smile on and we're the country club family on Instagram, on Facebook. It's just not true. It's an illusion. And I think the more we can talk about that and be real and confess our sins one to another and be accountable for them, the more likely we are to be successful at having healthy relationships.
It's so true. Take the mask off, just get real and lay the pride aside. I think everything we do, if we come from a place of humility, we come with a posture of surrender. I think it's Psalm 70, right? Verse 1 says, help me, right? Like, rescue me, oh Lord. Well, let's just say that we're all broken and we all need help. And let's recognize seeking help as a strength versus a weakness.
And this brings us to that story of the prodigal father, where the prodigal son was well aware of his mess. He comes home to his dad. I've wrecked my life. I'm really sorry. I've made a mess of things. And the older son, who was so smug and self-righteous, was totally unaware of his own smug, self-righteous, I'm the perfect son and you're the mess. And I think we can fall into those two things as Christians. I remember growing up in my church back in Allentown, there was a family that was like the perfect family and their kids were the perfect kids and they always did everything right. And I was always feeling like such a loser. Yes. And as I've seen them grow up, I see you had warts there all along, just nobody saw them. And I think if we could just be more real and honest, I think people would be more transformed because it wouldn't be so shameful to talk about it.
Oh, that's so good. So talk about self-awareness. What are some practical tools that you suggest people use to become more self-aware? And I love how you say, it's not about gazing at your navel, right? It's not navel gazing. It's not becoming self-absorbed, but it's just becoming self-aware so that you know you know what your values are, you know your strengths and your weaknesses. So what are some practical things you would suggest to do that?
Well, I think that journaling is a really good way of becoming self-aware, and not journaling like I went to the park today, but I went to the park today. Why did I choose the park? How did that make me feel? How did I respond to things? Was I proud of myself? Was I not proud of myself? Am I happy with the person I am? Am I happy with the person I'm becoming? Do I know the person I am? What do I think? What do I feel? And I think as you journal different things, especially when you feel emotional. So when you feel emotional, your emotions are like those warning signs on the car dash light, check oil. When you feel emotional, like yesterday I was walking. I was just walking. I walk every day for 5 miles. But at the end of the walk, I started to feel emotional. Like this big lump started welling up in my chest and I just wanted to sob. And I wasn't sure what that was all about. But I was noticing, I was self-aware enough to notice I'm feeling this big wad of grief. And I just want to cry and cry and cry. I wonder what that's about. And so being curious about yourself, not trying to shove everything down so that you can be happy and perfect all the time, but ask yourself, what's that about? And what do I want? Because what do you want is not a selfish question. Obviously, nobody ever gets everything they want all the time. Mm-hmm. But if you don't know what you want, what God has put in your heart for you to do in life is about what you want, just like taste buds. If you don't know what you like and don't like, then you can't choose wisely what to eat and what not to eat, or what will bring you pleasure and joy even in eating, or if you don't experiment with some things. And so asking yourself those self-awareness questions. But I think the other thing that I wanted to make really clear is you can't become self-aware on your own, because the Bible tells us that the heart is deceitful above all else and desperately wicked. Who can know it? So you can't know your own self, both your strengths as well as your weaknesses, all by yourself. And that's why we need those truth tellers. That's why we need loving people in our life, and sometimes even harsh people. My mother, when she would berate me and say horrible things about me, there was always a smidgen of truth to them, and so sometimes even your enemy can say some things that you need to hear. It doesn't mean they're going to be your friend, but it may mean that God uses the mouth of a donkey or the mouth of someone you don't like to give you some feedback about yourself that you need to hear. And that's part of self-awareness too.
That's so good. Truth tellers, it's painful. but it's so necessary because we have blind spots. And I think I heard Pastor Jeff Henderson once say, ask people closest to you, 5 people, what's it like to be on the other side of me? What's it like to be on the other side of me? And also be aware of what do people typically say about you, like, and you reject it, like, what does your spouse or your best friend or your child say, like, oh, when you do that, it's so annoying, and you just go, no, then you tune into that, because those are the things that are probably the blind spots that we need to shine in humility, shine a big spotlight on, so that we can become more aware.
Yeah, and I remember when I gave my children permission, this is an important thing, I gave my children after that time permission to give me feedback about how they were feeling. And so what they would start to say is, Mommy, you're scaring me, right? Because I'd have this like, that monster look, Mommy, you're scaring me. And so I might not have known I was close to that line of losing it. But when they gave me that feedback, by giving them permission to tell me how I was affecting them, I didn't just say, oh, you're being ridiculous. Okay.
Right.
That's a warning sign, like my engine's about to blow up. I better back off here and get some self-awareness. My temper is much hotter than I thought it was.
Yeah. That curiosity, coming from that place of curiosity, right? Realizing I don't have this all figured out. I need help. And I love what you talked about with feelings, right? Because so many times we think that we are our feeling. And I heard somebody recently say, to observe and to be curious about your feelings when you feel an emotion, like you talked about on your walk, and to just kind of like step back and say, okay, I see you. And somebody actually said that it was like they reached into the side of themselves, pulled the feeling out, looked at it, and said, okay, I see you. And I see you're trying to help me. Yeah. I'm not you. Like if it's sadness or loneliness or whatever it is, that's not my identity. It's a feeling inside of me. And now I see it. Why am I feeling that way? Be curious about that. And then sometimes reach out for help when you recognize that those feelings maybe become despair or, things that you need fresh perspective on.
Yeah. Even the psalmist asked himself, he said, why are you so downcast, oh my soul? Right. And so we can ask because our feelings are sort of like our taste buds. They can be wonderful and they can be horrible. But they do warn you of things. I mean, isn't it amazing how you can be in the middle of drinking a carton of milk that's gone sour and you don't swallow it because your taste buds at the back of your tongue go, right? They don't want it to go down. And so they're acting as your protectors. And so our feelings sometimes give us warning bells. But what we do with them sometimes as Christians is we suppress them, like, oh, I shouldn't feel like I hate my kids, or I shouldn't feel like I hate my husband right now, or I shouldn't feel like this. I feel like a bad person if I feel like this. Yeah. Instead, it's not about your personhood, it's about your feeling. And so let your feeling inform you. I hate my kid right now. Doesn't mean you say it. It doesn't mean it's true. It just lets you know, whoa, what's going on in you that you have this feeling? Because you know that's not really true all the time. It's just true right now. What do you need to do with that so that you don't let that feeling get the best of you?
That's good. Yeah. And to sit with yourself and allow God to be present in those feelings and in those emotions. There's so many laments throughout the Bible, right? You said the psalmist, like taking the time to lament. And we live in a society that is very much a suck it up, buttercup, get over it. What's the matter with you? Why aren't you happy? Instead of like, no, just like allow the Holy Spirit to minister to you in this moment and to be present with you and be held. And sometimes we can do that for others as well.
Yeah. Another thing that I think is really important to understand self-awareness. This is an exercise that was actually developed by St. Ignatius, and it's called the Examen.
Yes.
You can get Protestant versions of this. Yeah. So I used to do this in my office a lot. And one of the things I discovered about myself that I didn't know about, so I would every day at the end of the day, I would ask myself a couple questions like, what today brought me joy? What today brought nourishment to my soul? What today happened in the external part of my life or the internal part of my life that felt really peaceful and joyful and loving? And what today happened that felt so depleting and energy draining and discouraging? And as I paid attention to the pattern of that, one of the things I found that was life-changing for me is that sunshine and going outside was life-giving. And so working in an office and sitting all day in a counseling office from 7 in the morning till 7 at night or 9 in the morning till 9 at night, whatever, could deplete me if I didn't intentionally get outside and take a walk. And that's why every day now I take a walk for 5 miles, because that is so important. But I didn't know that that was so important to my well-being until I began to ask myself that question. So just like bathing is important to your overall well-being physically, walking for me and being outside in nature, that's why we moved from Pennsylvania to Arizona. I just needed a little bit more sunshine. And that was part of, that's not selfish, that was self-awareness.
Yeah. And the more self-aware you become, then the better. I love when you talked about this morning about sometimes we're so focused on finding the right person, or if you were the right person, I would be happy. When really we need to figure out how to be the right person, right? How to be the best spouse, how to be the best friend, how to be the best parent. Because if we're self-aware, we know those things that make us feel alive, and we take care of ourselves, we're better for all of the people around us. There's nothing selfish about that.
And even asking yourself, not what kind of parent should I be, or what kind of husband should I be, or what kind of wife should I be, but really asking yourself the deeper question, what kind of parent do I want to be? What kind of legacy do I want to write as myself as a parent? Because once you're conscious of that, so I've never met anybody who said, I really want to be the worst parent I could be.
Right.
But when we live in default mode without ever self-reflecting on that, that's often what happens, because we let our emotions and impatience and anger and frustration and whatever toward our kids write the story, instead of saying, wait a minute, how would the best version of myself as a parent show up in this moment? And that's a completely different story.
It is. Yeah, because then you parent with the end in mind. You parent backwards, right? You determine what your values are, what you want your kids to say about you when you're no longer here, what you want them to tell their grandkids about your grandkids about you. And we get that choice. It's what you talked about. We get to write the story.
We get to write the story, yeah.
I'm doing premarital counseling with a young couple, and last week when we met, I said, you know what I want you to do? I want you to take some time to think about and write out, when your kids are sitting in their premarital coaching session, and the counselor asks, tell me about your parents' relationship. What was modeled for you? What do you want them to say?
Good
and
question.
That's that whole, we get to write the story. That's so good. Tell me a little bit about, when we talk about maintaining, and what do you think is the key to, so let me say this. When maybe we've made some decisions or not been intentional about deciding what the kind of parent or the spouse or the friend that we want to be, and we find ourselves with a broken relationship, what do you think is the key to begin repairing that broken relationship in a very practical sense? Sometimes what do we need to do?
I think the first step is to self-examine, what has been my part in breaking up this relationship. So that requires that self-awareness. I can't self-examine myself if it's all your fault. You left me, you broke up our family, when perhaps I've committed adultery and watched porn, or I've been nasty with my tongue, and yet it's your fault that you're breaking up our family. That's delusion. That's not thinking clearly. That's not taking responsibility. That's not reflecting on what part are you responsible for in this relationship. And if you've done damage and someone's saying, that's enough, I'm not letting any more damage come my way, they're not breaking up the relationship. The relationship's already been broken. They're just being honest about it now.
Wow.
I think just you cannot fix something, whether it's your broken tooth, whether it's a mole on your body, whether it's a broken car or a broken wind. You can't fix anything if you don't first admit it's there. And so we so often go into denial. It's not that bad. It's not really going to end our relationship. We'll get over it. And we don't do the repair work. And the more you avoid repair work, guess what? If you don't fix a leaky roof, my neighbor just had to tear apart his whole roof because he didn't fix one little leak. And then that one little leak did all kinds of damage to the rafters. And then that leak did all kinds of damage to the floor. And now he's got to tear apart his whole second story because he ignored repairing a small little leak that would have cost him maybe $1,000. Now it's probably $15,000, $20,000, $25,000 to fix this damage. And I see that happening in relationships all the time. And sometimes, to be perfectly honest, some relationships are not repairable. They are permanently damaged.
Okay. So what do you do? What would you say? Because God is a God of hope and he's a God of restoration, right? And redemption. We talked about that, right?
Yes.
I know for my marriage, like I said, it's a miracle that we are still married today. And it's been a lot of work. to be where we are today. And it's continual work to have a healthy marriage. And so what would you say is I think of the best way to ask this. So if you've tried and you've tried and you've tried on your own to fix the marriage, would you recommend going, like, I think if I'm having a heart issue, right? If I'm feeling like my heart, there's something wrong with my heart, or I'm getting headaches all the time, for my heart, I'm going to an expert, a cardiologist, to get the help. And we talked about sometimes pride keeps us from doing that. But do you feel like that fresh perspective from an outside voice, a counselor, is beneficial? I mean, I would imagine that you do, but what are your thoughts?
I think the outside perspective of people can be very beneficial as long as those people are self-aware and wise enough to give good counsel. Because you can go to a bad cardiologist and they can say, you know what, I just think you have indigestion when you're having a heart attack.
Right.
So I think that sometimes when you misdiagnose the problem as a doctor or as a people helper, or as a coach, and you give a treatment plan because of your diagnosis. So you just have bronchitis, but you really have COVID-19, or you just have the common cold when you really have lung cancer. The medication that you would give for the first order of problems is not the same, and it's completely impotent to the second order. And then we wonder why a couple keeps getting sicker and sicker and the relationship isn't better. So yes, I think you need some outside counsel, but you need some outside counsel from people who know what they're talking about in those areas. And unfortunately, in the area of destructive relationships, I have felt that, and I have found that the church tends to value keeping the marriage together, or keeping the relationship, or reconciling the relationship, which is a great value of God. But they do it with duct tape instead of really repairing the problem.
Right.
And so that doesn't really reconcile or restore the relationship. It might keep it together for a little bit so that it doesn't fracture apart in the moment. But if my neighbor had put duct tape on his roof, it might have saved it for a little bit, but the problem is still going to be there because it's still there.
Okay, so what if we find ourselves in an emotionally destructive relationship, abusive relationship, or I guess the other side of that would be if I know somebody who is in an emotionally or physically abusive relationship, what do we do?
So let me say a couple principles. So you said, how do we maintain hope and not lose hope that God can work and yet live in reality? There's something called the Stockdale syndrome, and I think it's Stockdale. This man, he was a Vietnam prisoner of war for a long time, and he was interviewed in some business books about what kept you sane in an insane situation. And he said hope, but this kind of hope, because the people who died the quickest were the optimists who had unrealistic hope. So they would say, we'll get out of here by Christmas, and then Christmas didn't happen. And we'll get out of here by Easter, and then Easter didn't happen. So his hope was, I am sure God is at work here, and he will take care of me. There was no, it has to be this way. So I think part of when you're in a destructive relationship with someone, you have to get your head straight. Because at least in my Bible, God never changes anybody who doesn't ask to be changed. So there is no miracle that comes down on someone. Even the Apostle Paul, who was a anti-God person, when Jesus met up with Paul on the road to Damascus, Paul still had a choice. Was he going to bow his knee to King Jesus, or was he going to refuse? And then Paul was changed. Saul was changed to Paul. And so we want to understand that when we're dealing with a destructive person, and they have no heart to change, it's all your fault. They have no desire to change. They have no humility to change. They have no willingness to change. They're blind. Jesus called it blindness in the Pharisees. They didn't change. Judas didn't change.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do. And don't come in with this false hope that somehow God's going to change someone that never asked to be changed. Repentance is, change me, Lord. I need to change. I am a sinner. That is what repentance is. And pride says, it's your fault. I don't need to change.
Oh. You said something this morning that chronic adultery, addictions, and abuse cause marriage problems, but they are not marriage problems, and they damage relationships. And I thought that was so important, because sometimes it can take on, if somebody has an addiction issue, they're abusive, they are, like you said, chronic adulterers, it can tend to be like, this is our marriage problem, but it's not. The
Wow.
person needs help to break those negative patterns. And that's
I just
separate.
talked to a woman this morning who went to like 4 different Christian counselors. She's in ministry. Her husband are nationally known in ministry, and he's got a horrible temper problem and blames her for it all. And so they go to marriage counseling every single time. And it's always, well, stop pushing his buttons and stop triggering him and stop aggravating him and just do what he wants and he won't act that way. That's not true. He acts that way because she does shake him. And then he acts that way because he's that way. This is his dirt to work on. Because she can't ever not shake him. And I'm not saying at some point she doesn't also need to mature, but it's not a marriage problem. He doesn't act that way, or I didn't act that way because of my little boy. My little boy shook me and I acted that way because it was in me to act that way.
Right. We got to deal with our stuff. It takes two, right? I remember.
So I think the most hopeful thing I can say to someone is you can fix something if both of you are humble and willing to do the work. You can't fix a broken relationship all by yourself. In fact, you can't even have a relationship with someone all by yourself, including marriage. What you can have is ministry to that person. Jesus had ministry to lots of people he didn't have relationship with. It wasn't mutual. It wasn't a give and take. He gave, they took, but it wasn't a relationship. And don't confuse that.
Yeah, well, that's good. Well, what do we do to help someone? Actually, can we start with this? What do we say to someone who tells us they're being abused or they're in an abusive relationship? What's the most helpful thing? Because you talked about some of the the hurtful things and the ways that we can actually make it worse, but what can we do?
You know, if someone is courageous enough to tell you very specifically that they're in an abusive relationship, I think you need to applaud them and validate them and say, oh my gosh, I had no idea. I am so sorry. And thank you so much for trusting me enough to tell me something so awful in your life. Because what often happens is you say that and someone says, I can't believe that. He's a great guy. I've never seen him act that way. And so you invalidate, and this person now says, it's not safe to tell you. No one will believe me. Where do I go for help if no one's going to believe me? And so if someone is that clear with you, usually they're not. Usually they'll say, I don't know, it must be me. I must be doing something to tick him off. It's usually they'll take responsibility, overly responsible for how he behaves or how she behaves. I remember talking to a man just this weekend. He said, the most freeing thing you ever said to me, Leslie, his wife committed multiple affairs. Every time they would go to marriage counseling, it was always like, what kind of husband are you? And why aren't you meeting her needs? And why aren't you a better husband? It was always his fault that she was committing adultery multiple times. And he said, the most freeing thing you ever said to me is chronic adultery is not a marriage issue. It causes marriage issues. He couldn't fix her problem. She had to fix her problem.
What do you think, what is it that, and think of someone really, really close to me who was in a very, very abusive, emotionally, physically abusive relationship for a number of years. It was so painful to watch. And sometimes, if I'm being honest, I would get so angry because I would just think, how can you say in that abusive situation? I remember she was pregnant and he beat her when she was pregnant. And my heart just this is someone I love so dearly. And I just couldn't understand. And I think sometimes when that happens, we can tend to just unintentionally become angry and just well, I don't get it. You're stupid. And so why do keep doing this? And then we turn our back on them. But help us understand and empathize. Why does a person typically stay with an abuser?
There are a lot of reasons. One would be the whole God hates divorce. God hates divorce. God hates divorce. So he must be calling me to stay and love no matter what. So we can spiritualize this so much. I need to love him unconditionally. If I stay and love him unconditionally, maybe that's going to please God and God's going to get to his heart. All of those kind of things. That's one. Number two, I didn't prepare myself fully as an adult, so I don't know how to get a job, or I don't have an income, or I don't have a career that can support myself if I leave, and I've got 6 kids. I don't know what to do. Third, I don't trust him with our children, and if he gets 50-50 custody, I'm afraid that he would be abusive to them sexually or physically, and at least I'm the buffer. At least, so there's lots of complicated reasons, spiritual, self-esteem issues. I deserve it. I'm not worth much. Nobody will love me. It's just a sad, sad thing. And so I think if we can come alongside someone who's in that situation and really help them see God cares for the oppressed, and he is never on the side of the oppressor, because when it's a marriage situation, sometimes, again, as a church, we've made a gigantic, I think, mistake in valuing the sanctity of marriage, which is perfectly sacred, but more than the safety and the sanity of the people in the relationship. And so therefore, we're not willing to be honest and confront evil and wrongdoing because we don't want to break up the marriage. But the marriage is broken. It's broken whether you're divorced or not. We're just not talking about it. But we need to talk about it. We need to make it safe to talk about it.
What would you say to somebody who is watching right now and they are in an abusive relationship?
I would say the first thing that you need to do is you need to validate that God hates what's happening to you and your kids. It's okay to tell. And it's okay to begin to educate yourself, because you don't know what to do and you don't have to decide right now, but start educating yourself on what does God say about abuse? What does God say about how much he cares about you and your children and their safety and their sanity? And then get some support. Support is critical for you to be able to take your next steps. And I work with a lot of women all over the world who are supportive of one another, because sadly, there hasn't been a lot of support in the church, especially for women who've been in abusive relationships. And men either, because it's shameful for a man to say, my wife hits me or degrades me or doesn't let me manage the money in the household. It's humiliating to talk about it that way. So we don't give a safe space to really be honest.
Right. Well, that's so good. I know we have a hotline in an organization in our area called Safe Berks. And there's a hotline, 1-844-789, and then the word safe, 7233. And that is an incredible resource for people to just reach out. And if you're in danger right now, 100%, I think the best thing you can do is call 911 and then reach out to a hotline, to 24-hour hotline. I think that is a great first step, but also just reaching out to someone who can help, someone who is a safe place for you. And for those who are listening, if you're ever in that situation, that when someone does come to you, I hope you heard what Leslie said. Validate, listen, right? Just listen. Don't try to come up with fancy answers or scriptures to, throw at them in the moment, but just be present and listen. The ministry of presence is so underestimated. And then validate them and then come alongside of them and help them get the help that they need. Leslie, you have so many incredible resources in addition to your books, so many incredible resources on your website. We're going to put the link to that, to those in our chat. But leslievernick.com, right?
leslievernick.com. And then I have a ton of little short YouTube videos that are really safe to watch because you don't have to turn your volume. They're all transcribed. All the words are on the screen there, so you can just watch the video and read the words. Those are also on my Facebook page. And they're all about short little topics like, is it my fault? And if he doesn't hit me, is it really abuse? And all different little 5-minute segments of just one snippet of this that will educate you. Even if you just have to watch it silently on your phone, you still get the gist of it.
Wow. Thank you for doing this work. Thank you for being so passionate about it and giving your life to it and helping so many people. I've talked to so many counselors that we're just really, really excited. You're their hero and their mentor, and they follow you and read your books, and you inspire them and you inspire me and so many of us. Thank you for helping us to get this right and to really be able to help people in the most holistic way, in the Jesus way. I think that's really, really important that we do that. So much to learn, and we just appreciate you so very much. Thank you. Thank you for joining us tonight. Is there anything else you want to say as we wrap up?
I just so appreciate your church caring about this. It's rare. It's not that churches don't care about abuse, but to really care about helping couples, helping individuals have safe, healthy, strong relationships, and how to repair and heal damaged ones is something that we don't want to talk about because we're afraid we're going to open this kettle of awful stuff and we won't know what to do with it. And God can equip us to do things with it if we can just be with it. We don't have to solve it overnight, but just to talk about it, be honest, be real, and God can do some amazing things.
He can. We're all broken, right? And we're all on a journey, and we need one another. We need authenticity so that we know that it's okay to not be okay sometimes. Get the help that we need. Well, thank you, Leslie, so much. Again, we appreciate you. We're so thankful that you spent this time with us. Tomorrow, you're going to be spending a couple of hours with our staff and training us on how to do better, how to help people in better ways. And we're just grateful to you.
I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you.